Thank you, Carolyn, and good morning, everyone. I just wanted to start by building on what Carolyn said and recap some of the background to the project. So if we click on a slide, at Internet Matters, our vision is to ensure all children are able to flourish online. And the project was conceived to help us understand the impact of technology on children's well-being, both positively and negatively, as we've been hearing about, against the backdrop of an ever-changing digital world. To do this, we wanted to be able to measure and track the effects of being online on children and young people and try to answer some fairly big questions. So who's experiencing the most positive outcomes and what do those look like? Who's suffering the worst negative impacts and where do those inequalities lie? And how's the picture changing over time? But we first of all needed to define what being well in a digital world actually looks like. And at the start of 2021, we commissioned Dr. Diane Levine and her team at the University of Leicester to help us create this definition. You can see the result written here, and it was produced following consultation with those closest to the issue. Di consulted with representatives across education, industry, policy, academia, children's services, and a third sector. The subsequent report, Children and Families' Wellbeing in a Digital World, identifies 4 dimensions of wellbeing: developmental, emotional, physical, and social, which by that group were considered to be the most impacted by digital participation, and looks at both the positive and negative outcomes for each. As the definition suggests, we acknowledge that this happens within a wider context, within families, within communities, wider society, and the world. It changes all the time, and each dimension isn't independent. They all interact with each other. So all in all, it made it quite a tricky thing to go and try and measure. But I'm really pleased to say that Revealing Reality took on this challenge with us. They used the framework and spoke to families themselves to understand how to research these concepts and measure the outcomes in a meaningful way. So last year, we created and published the first index focused specifically on the impact of the digital world on the wellbeing of children and young people aged 9 to 15 in the UK. It's provided us with a huge and unique data set that links together the thoughts and perceptions of parents and their children within the same household, as the surveys are run in matched pairs within families themselves. In the report we published last year, the index set a benchmark indicating that screen use plays a key role in impacting children's well-being, not just the length of time they spend online, but really and most importantly, what activities they take part in. It showed some really interesting insights on how the index scores changed across the dimensions for children who are avid gamers versus those who are big users of social media, for example. And then building on the work that Internet Matters always championed around supporting vulnerable children online, the first wave of the index also showed that children with special educational needs and disabilities, physical disabilities and mental health issues experience more of the negative impact of digital technology on their well-being, but also, and crucially, some more of the positives as we've been hearing about, particularly in relation to their emotional well-being. So finding that being online really helped them to allow them to be more comfortable with being themselves, things that they often struggled with in an offline world. It also helped us to lift the lid on family dynamics and demonstrated what pivotal role parents and carers play in helping their children to have a positive and rewarding online life, and also what support and help they need to play that role in a really meaningful way for their children. This year, being able to see how the index has changed year on year and for which groups, we've built on these findings, which Revealing Reality will share with you shortly. I think they'll agree with me that creating the index has been quite a learning curve, and we've had lots of head scratching and discussion about what goes into it and how we really make it meaningful for families. And during the analysis of the first year's data, we noticed several areas of opportunity for improvement. We made some changes to help us explore the effects of digital technology on children's wellbeing from fresh angles. And during the development for year 2, we've strengthened key elements of the research programme. So firstly, additional question items in both the children's and parent surveys were added to broaden the exploration of the different impacts across all of the wellbeing dimensions we measure. And a lot of this was to help us keep pace with the digital world. We've seen how it's ever changing and what children are exposed to just grows all the time. So we wanted to make sure the index was future-proof for that widening kind of sense of experience they get online. An entirely new section of the questionnaire was also introduced with items exploring children's experiences of online harms, what effect they felt these experiences had, as well as their parents' perceptions and what they most worry about in relation to their children's online lives. Questions were also included to expand our definition of vulnerability to include financial and digital disadvantage, introducing new items revealing parents' digital habits, skills and parenting styles, as well as capturing children's online behaviours, so whether they were active or passive users of online services and the impact that has on their experiences for good and for bad. And finally, we expanded the sample to children aged 16 and their parents. Our year-on-year comparisons that you'll hear about shortly use only like-for-like data, but the additions we've made this year have given us even a larger data set and huge opportunity for further analysis as we go forward. I'll now pass over to Ruby and Hannah from Revealing Reality, and they'll take you through some of the details of the findings for year 2. And as I do that, I really want to say a big thanks to them for their dedicated focus and support over the last few years now to really bring this project to life.
Thanks, Rachel. So yeah, we're going to try and relatively quickly take you through some of the top line findings from this year's report. Obviously, as we've been hearing, technology has become increasingly intertwined with children's daily lives, and it's really important, like Rachel said, that we keep finding new ways to explore the implications of this. So if we could go on to the next slide, there might be a slight lag. The index offers us a chance to explore what effect this is having on children's well-being, comparing families with different characteristics or behaviours, as well as beginning to track these over time. So in 2022, we, as Rachel said, started wave 2 of this project. There were a number of improvements and developments made to the index. We ran the survey with 1,000 families with both children and a parent in the same household. So we have paired results. And we also conducted qualitative interviews with 6 families to explore these dynamics and issues on the ground and to start bringing the stats to life in the report as well. So because the index is based on a kind of amalgamated scores from dozens of individual items, and those scores are now being compared year on year, I'm just going to take a moment to explain a little bit how the graphs represent all of that data, because I'm not going to lie, they are a little bit of a headache. So you'll see charts like this over the next few slides that show wave 2 scores indexed against wave 1. So a lot of these charts are comparing things year on year. There are 4 dimensions of well-being, or the impact that digital can have on well-being. So like Rachel explained, these are developmental, emotional, physical, and social well-being. And then for each of those, there is a score for both the positive and negative impact that digital can have on children's well-being, because as we've seen from interviewing lots of children in their homes, digital can have both a positive and negative impact on a child at the same time. So it's important that the index captures both of those. So you'll see here that relative to last year, there's been a decrease in the positive impact of children's developmental well-being, and a tiny but insignificant increase in the negative impact. So I know that that is a little bit of a flip to make in your head, but we will obviously explain all of these charts as we go through and be pointing out what the implication is, rather than relying on you to pull all of that out yourselves. So with that, we are going to move to the first section.
Cool, thanks Ruby. And sorry, I think there might be a slight lag on the slides, but they'll be okay as we move through. So as Rachel and Ruby have said, this is obviously the second wave of this index, which means not only can we compare index scores across different types of families and different types of children, but it also means for the first time we're able to start analysing how these index scores are changing year on year. So beginning to highlight some emerging patterns and trends that Internet Matters can continue to track in the future with the index as it moves forwards in future waves. So turning to this first comparative year-on-year analysis, overall, children and their parents are reporting fewer positives and more negative impacts of being online on their children's well-being. So sorry, as this moves forwards. As you can see across the 4 dimensions of well-being, when we look at the metrics that are measuring the potential positive impacts of digital on children's well-being, there have been declines across all of them apart from 1, suggesting that broadly children are feeling fewer of the benefits. And this is especially when it looks at their developmental and their social well-being. So when we look at the statement level here, children are far less likely to report that they're using technology to be independent or to get ideas about the future, or to learn things about school or things they might not learn in other places. And they're also less likely to feel the benefits when it comes to their relationships. So they're less likely to feel that technology is letting them make good friends or stay in contact with people or using devices to make them feel like part of a group. It is worth mentioning here, though, that this doesn't necessarily mean that digital is providing fewer benefits. It is possible that children and families, as life is returning to post-pandemic and people are, going back to work and children are spending, a full academic school year in person, they're relying less on technology than they did in the first wave, which was during some of the lockdowns in the pandemic. So alongside fewer of the positives, wave 2 also saw an increase in most of the statements that were measuring the negative effects of digital on children's well-being. So showing increases across all of them, bar the emotional dimension of well-being, which I'll touch on slightly later. And this was particularly for their physical well-being. So there was one statement in particular that really seemed to be driving this increase in negative impact. And that's in terms of children reporting that they're staying up much later on their devices. And this was unsurprisingly having quite a negative effect on their sleep patterns and how they felt physically after a late night staying up on their phones or devices. And these movements were seen across the total sample, but were particularly the case for the youngest girls in the sample, who seemed especially to be feeling more of the negative impacts on their social and their physical well-being. And so when we zoom into the statement level again, we looked at what was driving this for 9 to 10-year-old girls specifically, and it seems that they're experiencing fewer of the positives socially to a much greater degree than the wider sample, and also reporting more than other groups that they feel upset when they miss out on something that happens on social media. And they're also much more likely than the rest of the sample to stay up late on their devices or up late gaming than the other groups. So there could of course be many explanations for this, but these experiences for the younger girls may point towards children gaining greater access to digital technology and social media from a younger age, and then the impact that a fear of missing out or FOMO can have on children once they've become introduced to these environments and once they start gaining access to social media. So as Ruby and Rachel mentioned, we also spoke to 6 families to kind of get some greater insight into the findings that came out from the survey. And this is one of the children that we spoke to, Laura, who I think we're also going to hear a little bit more from later. Laura is a huge fan of Roblox. For her, the online world is a really important place in terms of her friendships, as important as her in-person friends at school. And so when she was asked whether she preferred her online or her in-person friendships, she really couldn't decide, even though she hadn't met any of her online friends and she doesn't really know anything about them. And in fact, she reflected that once some of these friends just stopped playing Roblox, they would lose contact completely, and described several friendships that she's just never heard from again once they stopped playing the game. And finally, before we turn to some of the wave 2 only findings, I wanted to go back to that emotional wellbeing dimension. So compared to wave 1, the negative impact on children's emotional wellbeing has lessened. And this is seen at a total sample level, but it seems to be really driven by the boys in the sample, especially the 15-year-olds, who report that digital technology is having much less of a negative impact on their emotional wellbeing than the previous year. And in particular, they report worrying much less about what people think or say about them online, as well as comparing themselves less to others online. Again, it's difficult to pick out exactly why this is, and this is obviously just the second year, so it's a trend to look at over time and see how this continues in the future. But these changes could be linked to less reliance on social media for teenage boys, or just that they feel more confident online than other children in the sample. So just as I hand over to Ruby, I'm just going to summarize. Broadly, children seem to be experiencing fewer of the benefits and more of the negatives of digital technology on their well-being.
Thank you. So as we mentioned before, we've added in new questions to the index this year, and some of these enable us to cut the data in new ways and compare different groups of children than we were able to do last year. So one area that Rachel mentioned where we've extended the survey quite a lot is around the experiences of online harms. Obviously a particular concern and focus right now. We asked children if they had experienced any of a really wide range of issues online, from bullying to seeing violent material to spending large sums of money secretly online. And we also asked them about how much they thought those experiences had negatively impacted them. So we're able to cut the index by those questions to see whether it is able to pick up those negative impacts on children's well-being. So just a quick note on these charts, unlike some of the previous ones, these are comparing groups of children from within wave 2 rather than comparing them to last year. So these are structured in a slightly different way. So here we can see that when we take the children who reported experiencing just one severely negative event online, their scores for the negative factors are significantly higher than for children who haven't had any of those experiences. So all of the negative index scores are significantly higher there. In other words, the index is detecting a kind of increased negative impact of technology to children's well-being for those children that had particularly difficult experiences from our list of online harms. And the opposite pattern is true when you compare children who have had none of these experiences. So on the right, in a second, you will see the equivalent chart for children who reported none of these experiences compared with the wider sample. And you can see that the opposite pattern is true, where all negative index scores are significantly lower for those children than the wider sample. So here, unsurprisingly, across the sample, the more time that children reported spending online and on social media, the greater the number of these experiences they reported having. So more time online means more opportunity to experience the negatives of being online, which is not surprising. And we did find similar findings last year, but the numbers are quite stark. So here you can see the number of online harms experienced by children split out by how long they spend online. So at the top, children who spend the least time online, only 2% of those say that they've experienced 5 or more of our list of online harms, compared with those who spend the most time online at the bottom, where 22% of those children report experiencing 5 or more. For those who spend the least time online, over half report experiencing no online harms, compared with only 16% of children who spend the most time. And in particular, the more time children spend online and on social media, the more likely they were to see violent content, to be contacted by somebody that they don't know, to see things that they think aren't true, to receive abusive messages from people that they know in real life, and experiencing bullying or abusive or upsetting comments from people that they don't know. So those are some of the things that children who spend the most time online seem to be experiencing the most.
And so, as Rachel mentioned at the beginning, one of the starkest findings from the first wave from the index was that it showed that children with vulnerabilities experience more of the negatives of being online. So this includes children with SEND, with physical disabilities, or challenges with their mental health. And this is something that we've continued to see this year. They report significantly more of the negative effects of being online across most of their areas of well-being. And this includes being much more likely to feel lonely or to stay up late and feel the physical effects of their digital life. We also analysed this against the online harm questions that Ruby just spoke through, and children with vulnerabilities reported a much higher incident rates of online experiences that could be considered harmful, and also reported that these experiences had much more of an adverse effect on them. So we wanted to talk you through one of the other children that we met as part of the qualitative element of the research. This is Luke, he's 14, and he has a number of what might be considered vulnerabilities, including ADHD, depression, and skeletal dysplasia. He's recently been diagnosed with chronic low moods, finding it really difficult to sleep, and has also been really struggling with school. And so for him, the online world has become this place where he's spending a majority of his time at the moment. He's got a few friends at school, but rarely meets up with them in person, and chooses to spend most of his time outside of school gaming. So around the time we spoke to him, this was averaging about 10 hours a day, often late into the night, especially on school nights. And this is leaving him feeling really tired, contributing to him feeling a lack of emotion about school and his life at the moment. However, looking at trends from the wider survey, similarly to last year, there are some metrics where vulnerable children seem to be experiencing slightly more of the positives than their peers. And these seem to be linked to an element of finding community online. So for example, finding role models or people they look up to, as well as feeling that their online lives help them feel more comfortable with being themselves. As Rachel mentioned, as part of Wave 2, we've also expanded the ways that we can look at vulnerability, starting to include elements of deprivation or income level. And while the factors that are at play here, that are influencing children's different experiences and the outcomes on their well-being, it seems to be that the outcome itself is the same. So here is showing children who receive free school meals, and these children are experiencing significantly more of the negatives of being online. With the greatest difference being on their emotional and their social well-being. So when it comes to emotional well-being, these really seem to be linked to the responses that children get to their online activities. So feeling more worried that they'll later regret something that they post, or being more upset if they don't receive as many likes or positive comments to what they post. And when it comes to their social well-being, Like children with SEND or experiencing physical or mental difficulties, children receiving free school meals were also much more likely to say that being online made them feel lonely, and that they turned down opportunities to see their friends in real life so that they could stay at home on their devices. So this year, the index has really continued to highlight the importance of understanding how technology impacts children with vulnerabilities, whether this is linked to their physical or their mental health or their family's wider circumstances.
And finally, one of the reasons that we run this as a paired parent and child survey is because we know that the dynamics between parents and children are so important for how digital is impacting children's well-being. So one of the things that enables us to do is compare how aligned children and their parents are in terms of answers to the same questions. And we can use that as a sort of rough proxy for telling us how involved parents are, how much discussion and transparency there is between parents and children on digital matters. So as we saw last year, alignment matters a lot for the impact of digital on well-being. On the, oh, I think we've gone one slide too far. That's okay. On the left, you'll see the index scores for children with the least alignment with their parents, so the least amount of questions where they've answered in the same way, showing significantly lower positive impacts to well-being across all scores relative to the wider sample. And then on the right, you'll see index scores for children with the most alignment with their parents, where they've answered the most or highest proportion of questions in the same way, showing significantly higher impacts to well-being across all scores relative to the entire sample. So you can see a clear divide there of children and parents where they have the most and least kind of agreement in what they answer to the questions. The items where this is particularly strong are where children are saying that they use the internet to learn new sports and skills, to stay healthy and to find role models. So in other words, things like this are where parents are likely to be much more proactive in supporting them to use digital in a way that is supporting their well-being. And parents agree here, of those that are the most aligned with their children, 80% feel that being online has been really important for their children to learn new skills. We also ask a question in the index about how much children talk to their parents about things that are important to them, and compare those who say hardly ever versus most days. So those who say hardly ever show significantly higher negative scores across all dimensions. And those who say that they talk to their parents about important things most days show the opposite pattern. So again, strong and open relationships between children and their parents appear to be a really crucial protective factor for the negative impacts of digital on children's well-being. And with that, I will say thank you and hand back to Rachel.